This is Mark Mullinex, and I welcome you back to Power for the Peaceful, a podcast and class on Taoism. Today, verse 17, it all happens naturally.
When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. When you listen to the ground and you put your roots down, you can hear what she says if you're listening. The sweet sound of the river as she moves over the stones. The same song that the blood in your body sings as it weaves around your bones. When you're listening, are you listening?
The unexamined life is not a human life. To talk about being human, you must talk of death. What does it really mean to be this featherless, bipedal, linguistically conscious creature born between urine and feces in that funky pushing place, knowing that one day our bodies will be the culinary delight of terrestrial worms? Who are we going to be in the meantime? No one gets out of time and space alive. Do we have the courage really to wrestle with who we are in this time and space? Come, learn how to die so you can know how to live. By Cornel West.
Big welcome back, and also a big welcome to our quote reader and question asker this week, Deborah Lynn, from Nashville, Tennessee, where she integrates 3 interrelated practices: licensed massage therapy, hospice chaplaincy, and exploring mystery. Today, verse 17, and I am excited for it because here is the first of 5 appearances in the Tao Te Ching of the idea of Ziran, Z-I-R-A-N, a Chinese concept that can be translated into English as spontaneity. Jiran was the phrase early Taoists used to try to convey how nature constantly happens by itself. I've anticipated such spontaneity for us in recent episodes with references to the unplanned and artless forces of the universe that both create and sustain. That is, originally there is an ingenuous, unprompted, unpremeditated, self-causing peace and harmony in all creation. Humans and the rest of creation are all tied somehow to these processes, and when we allow the spontaneous and unplanned self to emerge from within, because that spontaneous self has been there from the ancient beginnings of the world, then we are not just more human, but also more humane. More about that later today. Let's go to my translation of verse 17, which I called No Traces. The best leaders leave no trace of their governing among the people. The second best are known by the love of the people. The third best are obeyed through fear. Then come the despised and reviled. It's obvious, when a person does not trust himself, he hardly inspires others' trust. The leader's words are few, but each is priceless. Whatever she promises is a done deal. After her accomplishments, everyone says, it all happened naturally.
A skilled artisan leaves no traces. By Thomas Cleary.
To break this verse down, let's begin with a curious fact. The word leader is not explicit in this verse. Instead, we have the Chinese character for that which is above, with an adjective before it meaning the greatest. So the real translation is something like the greatest thing above or beyond. Even so, 9 out of 10 English translations of this verse, including mine, speak of a leader instead of this greatest thing above or beyond. An example of a translation that does not use leader or a person to personify this greatest virtue is C. Spurgeon Medhurst's 1905 Tao Te Ching translation. He translated it,
First, the supreme, then a sense of separateness. Next, preferences and eulogies. Lastly, fear, then scorn.
Thought you want to know about this behind-the-scenes translation drama, where the most often chosen word by English translators is not even explicit in the text. And instead of leader, one could just as easily use the words parent or friend or even colleague. All these words work quite well.
I've always believed that parents are not for leaning upon, but rather exist to make leaning unnecessary. Wayne Dyer.
People of Lao Tzu's day believed that the greatest period of peace and congruence of heaven with earth were the days of the reigns of what they called, quote, the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors, unquote, about 5,000 years ago. These early leaders were thought to exercise power so inconspicuously and so virtuously that the people hardly even knew they were there. A song from that time goes like this: sun up we rise, sundown we rest. We dig wells to drink, we plow fields to eat. The emperor's might, what is it to us? So Lao Tzu penned this verse 17, I believe, not to suggest leadership styles for his or our centuries, but to propose how the universe operates. Tao creates this hugely spontaneous, superior greatness above or beyond all else, a greatness that operates instinctively within and through all natural events. Except, well, when you just add human ego controls or interventions to this elixir of superior greatness, then the spontaneous superior greatness becomes diluted and watered down. So let me be clear. This verse is not some trendy treatise on how to lead. Rather, it demonstrates how spontaneous, supreme virtue operates invisibly. However, this supreme virtue can become adulterated and visible when some part of the creation, say human beings, start unduly desiring something they should not, like recognition. The verse also chronicles what can happen when this virtue gets accompanied by human wants and desires. A whole spectrum of lesser virtues then cascade, which the verse names as the second, third, and fourth best. Let's enumerate these 4 different kinds of virtues. First and foremost, imperceptible virtue that, when exercised, provokes no consciousness of its operation or existence. Then second best, a more visible virtue that arouses love and admiration among the people. Third, a soiled virtue style that leads and causes obedience through fear. And fourth, virtueless energies that are just reviling. They have no virtue and are reviled in turn. So when any part of creation practices this highest virtue, it's like someone who does good work but leaves no name card or other traces. Others hardly know someone was there. Later, perhaps, when these anonymous workers of virtue started to want recognition of their values, though, this highest of virtues begins to unravel. Their virtues become visible. First, people perceive their leaders, parents or colleagues, leading with justice and righteousness. This causes the people to love and praise their leaders. But just think, how might one begin to trust someone who operates out of a motive to be loved and praised? Do you sense the craziness in that? Fast forward a few decades, and all that justice and kind-heartedness begins to lose its luster, so the folks, quote, in charge, unquote, begin to lead and operate with laws and punishments and more control. Of course, when people are led with such coercive controls, they begin to act like children act when a domineering parent controls them. They despise and seek ways to subvert their parents' ways. All this suggests a principle of virtue. Act and speak with high, unimpeachable, invisible virtue, and you are never thought about. But lead with anything less, and you'll begin that spiral down into being first adored, then ignored, resisted, and hated.
When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, when you're listening, are you listening?
Now, in our original supreme virtue, no one needs to hold up a sign to declare, I am a superior, virtuous human being. You don't see animals proclaiming their superiority, do you? The hundreds of trees you may have seen already today, none has called attention to itself, right? But as we humans become conscious of and proud of our superiority and actually come to feel that we are the self-professed pinnacles of creation, we cross a line. As we start talking about, boasting about, and ever circling round ourselves in ever tighter loops, we see only ourselves, but not as the originally virtuous people that we are, but as we want others to view us, which causes us to do alien things, like seeking recognition. We amplify ourselves insatiably, desire self-promotion, and forget our original supreme virtue. Human beings are unique in our desires to self-amplify, and this causes suffering. Other animals and plants ask no more of nature than they were born with. Sun, food, shelter were all they yearn for, even to this day. They are comfortable with their needs, not their wants, satisfied. Only humans have trouble differentiating between needs and wants. As we started making our wants into realities, we started conjuring desires for things we could have, but did not yet already possess. So alone among all creatures, human beings began to design and build structures, tools, and machines that extended our natural capacities by what I call virtual means. By virtual, I mean humans became dependent on artificial technologies that enhance our natural human capacities, like telescopes extending our vision, but virtually. Radio extending our voices, but virtually. Airplanes increasing the range of the human legs. And the missile extends the human fist, but virtually. And now, such virtual machines and inventions are part of the legacy of every human being born today. Who will parse out for our newborns what is necessarily human and righteous and virtuous, and how to differentiate that from what is virtually human? Hardly anyone will do that, and so our impact as human beings today continues to extend way beyond our natural reach. Let me put this more simply. Our original gifts and vocations out of the womb render us already extremely, supremely virtuous and competent to be human beings. It is only when this virtue is dragged through the polluting effects that the human ego employs means to be recognized. It's a paradox. We are already the best human beings possible, but when we come to recognize this greatness, the downstream effects are usually ones of serving the human ego and not for the greater good. Instead, remember, naked you were born, naked you shall die. In the meantime, just lead from your naked, natural, abundant self and embrace your original nature. Do you lead from that deep reservoir? Anything else is artificial.
Discern the simplicity of everything like raw silk. Embrace the uncomplicated and unvarnished nature of things like an uncarved block of wood. Become smart by reducing self-interest and control. Practice wise self-interruption and break the complication habit. Tao Te Ching, verse 19.
Once created, our virtual presences began a life of their own, following a different and unnatural logic and law, leaving different kinds of footprints and legacies for later generations to follow. Today's so-called success stories center around our enhancements of our virtual powers and presences. And so reputations get built. Celebrities are made for glamorizing. Fortunes get made and become models for our young to emulate. Figures get manicured for public office or glamorous careers. Wars get fought. Locked in our mortal combats, it seems more important to project and protect our ego-assisted and artificial images of self than to live out what it means to be just humane and simply human. Anybody tired of our self-imposed civil wars yet?
The production of too many useful things results in too many useless people. Karl Marx.
So this verse is setting the ultimate standard of how virtue or Tao, or the best life possible, is to be lived. Just be your natural, outstanding, great self. No adornments necessary. There's absolutely no need to draw attention to self. Nothing gets served by attention solicitations. No need to augment yourself with virtual and artificial powers or devices. To be human, remember, is to be humane, the root of which is humus, or ground, or soil and mud. Our only job is to quietly turn that mud into pottery.
When you're listening, are you listening? When you're listening, are you listening?
As soon as you trust yourself, you will know how to live. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
Two final thoughts. When someone like a leader or a parent does not sense or practice self-trust born out of their natural self, how can they inspire? Whenever a leader or parent has not this self-trust, you know them by their noise. Look at me, I did this. I am going here and there, and I am protecting you. This is just an early warning indicator that someone has lost their innate, invisible authority. Listen how they prate and parade on. I've done this for you. Now you do that for me. And once begun, how does this stop? Can one regain one's high virtue again? Yes, but it is hard to displace ego habits. But we are given nature itself as our model and teacher. Look at how nature operates. Nature does not make deals to become noticed. Nature is not transactional. Does the sun ever put out a press release that it's going to rise on any given day? Does nature ever signal its virtue or its intentions? Does an ocean ever point out its waves for anyone to notice? Does that tree make you stop and admire it? So take a cue from nature. Be what you are. Do what you're made for. And then, like a wave or a setting sun, just retire without a eulogy or justification for what you've done. Who needs a gold watch when you're already gold? The second thing going on in this verse is this utterly fascinating phrase I mentioned at the top, the word Jiran. Jiran provides the climax to this verse. Ji means self, Ran means nature. Jiran is the final word in verse 17, literally, and the result of one's practicing the spontaneous superior greatness we've talked about so much already today. The two are either the same thing, or Jiran flows out of that superior greatness. Other ways to say Jiran in English include something that happens by itself constantly, or spontaneously self-so, or it is so by virtue of its own. And finally, the nature of what is so.
If you can do something for someone in such a way that they think they managed it all on their own, then you've done a good job. You can lead by just letting them do what they're capable of instead. Frederick Backman, From Anxious People, a Novel.
When someone or an animal is one with Tao, there's a spontaneous self, a spontaneous self-so-ness, and things happen by themselves all the time. To me, that's good news. The processes of the universe are not controlled, but happen of themselves, all by themselves. This means there is no divine ultimate will, just this spontaneous superior greatness that is every created thing's heritage and birthright, enabling every single one of the 10,000 things to live, quietly of course, into its own power and authority. Curious word, authority. Parker Palmer says that authority happens whenever one authors one's own life. No one else can do it for you. Your unique constellation of gifts and attributes are, well, exactly what the world needs. Jiran. Just the way you already are. Act with superior virtue and Jiran results. And the last lines of this verse come true. The leader's words are few, but each is priceless. Whatever she promises is a done deal. After her accomplishments, everyone says, Jiran, it all happened naturally. Jiran results when spontaneous virtue is let loose. One way we can boil this down is to remind us how actions speak louder than words. Lao Tzu was no friend of the clamor of self-promotion, nor of anything less than supreme virtue. He recommended only action so discreet that it goes unnoticed. And just like that, Tao Te Ching has taught us now for the umpteenth time about the priceless value of silence. When one considers this teaching, it appears undeniable that our tendency to get off balance by playing to the crowd is our daily temptation. We fall under the sway of sales promotions, of longing and desiring the wrong things. These bewilder the soul's real, true longing and befoul our acting out of superior virtue, where Ziran results. Question: do other animals get like this? Are animals self-aggrandizing? Do they fall prey to false narratives and get manipulated into yearning for things out of sync with their essence? Why do advertisers and influencers leave animals alone? The birds in my yard have no idea about the sirens of advertising that happen in my household. They would never, even if they could, click on clickbait or other such nonsense. Animals never get triggered by the shimmering maze of mass marketing. They excel in Jiran, or in Mary Oliver's wisdom, you only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. For human beings, however, with everything for sale, it can be challenging to locate the wild and tender being who lives deep within our bones. And that's our homework, dear class. Start looking for something you already possess, but may have forgotten. That wild, untamed being you remember being, but have lost sight of, perhaps because of self-promotions. Just start being your already Jiran, spontaneous self. Now to Deborah Lynn's query.
Verse 17 names the kinds of leaders we have watched emerge locally, nationally, and globally over these last many, many years. Leaders seeking to rule through hate, fear, mistrust, outright intentional lies. They seem to not care if they are despised or reviled. Those of us seeking to practice a different way of being, of leading in our communities, country, and world, are indeed misfitting, as suggested in verse 16. My question is this: how do we share? How can we share a world with people who choose, who consciously choose to be led by fear, hate, and lies?
We hear this question, Deborah, in so many forms these days. I think I know of whom you talk about, but let me state that those we may think are willing to be led by fear, hate, and lies also actually believe that we, us, the other side, are the fearful haters and the liars. So mistrust happens on both sides, and it's a battle of perception and self-perception on both sides. But that said, yes, you are right. There has always been, and ever will be, those in power who rule by supremacies so alien to the human birthrights of peace, harmony, and justice. And as long as one or both sides cannot tolerate each other and say things like, I would never let my son or daughter marry one of them, there is no solution to your great question. Someone is going to have to initiate the virtue of reducing hate, silencing of fear, using gentle words that overturn lies, and do the right things in invisible ways. Like, see the other side as the mirror of yourself. But once someone starts feeling superior, they start wanting a microphone, a loudspeaker, and a righteous grandstand on which to announce, our way is the only way forward. Perhaps we only harden the divisive lines between us and the other, rather than soften them. How to erase this line? It's the golden rule, which isn't do unto others before or as they do unto you. The golden rule ever says it's always our turn, my turn. Do first as you would be done by. It's always your move to make things different. Therefore, we don't antagonize but serve, and serve, and serve, forever if it has to be. Taoism says in verse 8, we are to act like water acts, humanely irrigating all the rough places of life, bringing moisture to dry places, serving anonymously as the smoother of tough places. This may mean inviting that representative of another point of view to a meal, a coffee, a beer. Without your agenda visible in the least, you just act humanely and listen. They may soften, or you may soften. No guarantees, but this softening takes a long, long time. Now, a problem. A wise listener like you would come back to my answer and ask, well, how do I share a world with an unbalanced Hitler or an ego-poisoned Putin? You can't talk reason or sense to them, right? Do they not need to be restrained or contained by force? Seeing your question in this dimension, Deborah, you have stumped this chump. I have no idea of a first move except human compassion. All I can offer is a hope that we human beings start remembering on a more massive scale our birthrights of peace and justice and virtue, and start educating young and potential future tyrants away from their extremes. Again, this is not a quick fix. There is no quick fix, but education is the only thing I can think of. But I'm going to turn this question over to the other class members. What do other members of this class feel about our current tyrants and fear-inspiring leaders? I welcome everyone to chime in on this, and I'll get your responses out in a future episode. This podcast is an original labor of love, designed, written, and co-produced by many whose central idea that Tao Te Ching remains good news for today. Tao still speaks. Deborah Lynn gave voice to our quotes this week in the question. Audrey Davis is our esteemed artist. Molly Hartwell sings her haunting song, Put Your Roots Down. Fortress Press holds the copyright for quotations from my Tao Te Ching translation. Thanks for your attendance in this class on Taoism, and may every one of your days begin in peace and become wombs for radical hope.
When you're listening, are you listening?